a lot of grief, and Divyanshi is here to talk a little bit about that.
So, grieving and mental health during the pandemic. Now, I think, like Suchita ma'am just said, this is something that most of us experienced, not just during the pandemic, but just throughout our lifetimes. It's a process that all of us have gone through. Now, grieving is clinically defined as a process of loss to anything we care about. It can be physical, social, occupation. Now, I've given a few examples of that, but that basically just means anything you care about, anything you love, when you lose it, your body has a reaction to it. Now, this is the internal reaction, not the external one, not the physical one, but what your brain goes through, what you feel. Grieving is that. Now, mind you here, grieving is not a destination that you reach after loss. Grieving is a process. So if you talk in terms of chemistry, it would be what you would write above the reaction head. It's not the product which is formed. Everyone goes through this process whenever they face loss. Now, the alternative to grieving is often just ignoring that something has happened. And that is something that one should totally avoid, even though grieving usually is looked at from a very negative perspective. But grieving is actually a very natural process that's meant to make sure that you get through whatever you're facing. It may look negative, it may seem like something very scary or something that you would want to avoid at at any cost. But it's meant to be there for a reason. It's meant to get you through that loss. I'm sorry, is anyone speaking?
No, but can I request everyone else to please mute themselves so that there is no sound? Anybody who's not speaking, please unmute yourself. Sorry, please mute yourself. Yeah. Go ahead.
So when people grieve, they often look at themselves in a very different way. And this is something that we don't really recognize because we think people who are grieving are unaware of the fact that they are grieving. However, this is very wrong. This is a very wrong concept. In fact, most people that do go through this process are self-aware. They know that there is something which is not right. They know that they're in a headspace which would not be considered normal. And again, here we're using a term normal, and there is no normal when it comes to human beings. It's always a case-to-case kind of a thing. Now, an analogy that's very often used in psychology is looking at themselves like a broken vase. Now, I don't know why they chose vase, but that's the analogy that is used most often. They basically look at themselves like a broken vase because they think whatever has mattered to them, they've just lost it. And now there's nothing left anymore. They feel empty. And it feels like someone has just gone and dropped it, and they've just broken into little pieces, and they've been smashed. And they look at themselves like they're broken, which is quite possibly what we would call the root of the problem, is looking at yourself like you're broken. Now, grieving, like I said, is a process and has stages. So the next slide, please. So grief has 7 stages. Now, this is again very clinical. There's no particular order that is followed here, but the thing is, we usually separate it into these 7 stages. There were initially 5 stages, which were actually published in 1969 in the book Death and Grief. It's still considered one of the very leading materials on psychology when it comes to grief and death. But well, with experimentation and all these years that we've gone through, we've learned that there are 7 stages. The first of which is, for obvious reasons, shock. You don't understand what's happened. You faced a loss and it doesn't make sense to you. You're simply just trying to cover yourself with some kind of an emotional blanket. And you don't understand what's going on. So you're just shocked. You just don't know what's going on. The second stage is denial. Now, I think this is something that we have faced a lot of times. Sometimes it's not even necessarily related to the process of grief. It's just denial happening. And it's just, denial is basically looking at something and not looking at it. Is you refuse to acknowledge that there is a problem. This is basically refusing to acknowledge the fact that there is something that, we've lost. And more importantly, it's refusing to acknowledge that loss has inspired some kind of a feeling in us, because you want to avoid that feeling at any cost. Shock and denial are basically emotional blankets. They basically, when you go through these two stages, you are in a state of numbness, because and this is normal, by the way. This is, again, I'm using the word normal again and again, but what I mean to say is that this is absolutely natural. It's okay to not be okay. That's something that you need to understand. But more than that, shock and denial and the state of numbness is something that your body is creating on its own to protect you, because this loss is too heavy for you to bear. It's very, very heavy. You can't just come out of it unscathed if you don't initially protect yourself. So shock and denial is, again, fine, because it's a natural process and you will progress. After denial comes anger, and this is the part, where the person in question will start, just getting angry for no reason at all, for people who are absolutely not guilty of anything whatsoever. They might be angry at the person who has caused the loss. For example, right now, because we are talking about mental health during the pandemic, a huge part of it is death. Some people, actually most people, just get mad at the person who has died, at doctors, at God, at family, friends, people who have really got nothing to do with it, if you look at it rationally. But anger is better than shock and denial for a reason, because this is the first time where you're feeling. This is the first time where your body is finally reacting to something. There isn't that, you don't have that emotional numbness in you anymore. So it's a good thing. But again, you have to make sure that, the people around you actually have to make sure that you're not going absolutely, just losing it, because that again can lead to. So anger is, again, natural, but in a certain controlling, almost a controlled environment. Again, the people around this person who's going through this process have to understand that the person doesn't mean it. It's something which is, this person is going through, and it's not something that, he's holding against him or her. The fourth step is bargaining. Bargaining is basically when your brain starts coming up with statements like, what ifs? If I stop eating meat, please give me this person back. Like, you start bargaining with God, you start bargaining with fate at this point. You're just like, I'll do anything to make this pain go away. And this, again, also is natural, but again, to a certain extent, because you start going, when you get that desperate to make that pain go away, that desperation can often lead to acts that you really don't want to commit. So bargaining, again, natural process, but has to be done in a controlled way. Depression. Now, this is clinical depression we're talking about, not the word that we use in our day-to-day, conversations that, oh my God, I'm feeling depressed. That's not depression. That's just you just feeling low. That's not depression. Depression, I mean clinical depression here, is the fifth stage of grief. And it may not be, it really depends on person to person how deep this goes. It can be something which is just, a touch and go kind of a dysphoria phase, or it can be something which is very, very long lasting. This is the first time where you're actually having those, feelings of sadness. You're starting to feel tired, and you're starting to feel that, something is now holding you back. Your chest starts to feel heavy. This is the place where you really feel that sadness of loss. Your anger has run out. You've realized bargaining will get you nowhere. That numbness has worn over, and the only, way you can deal with it is just accumulating your sadness inside your head. The sixth part is testing. Now, testing here does not mean a testing process. It basically just means trying to find realistic solutions for dealing with this loss. And this is more of a, trial and error kind of process that, an individual goes through. It can be just simply, for some, it's just, going through something as simple as meditation. For some, it's worse. It really depends on person to person. And the last stage is acceptance. Now, here, acceptance does not mean the fairy tale-esque happy ending. Here, acceptance means that the individual going through this process has accepted that there is a loss. Because till now, they were still, at times this denial process still continues in our head. This is that stage where you just reach where you go, okay, this situation is not going to go away on its own. I am going through something, and that something is not something I want in my life. But I need to, learn how first to deal with it. I first need to accept it. So this is the stage where you've realized that, okay, this is where realization strikes and your brain has gone, okay, we need to deal with this. So this is acceptance. Moving on, the next slide, please. Right. So I just talked about depression. I'm going to ask you this question. I'm going to ask you to answer this question in a little bit. Before I'll just explain you a little thing. When a person goes through depression, their brain activity reduces significantly because your brain is basically just saddled with emotions, right? At this point, you don't want to think, because when you think, you start very often actually, you start thinking about negative things first than positive things. If you ever look at the way you think about things, let's say you got a 28 in your physics test and you got a 70 in your chemistry test. You will first remember your physics test because you scored less. It's very natural for you to gravitate towards the negative part of something because that's what stays in your head. That's absolute normal psychology. That's what happens in depression. You gravitate towards the negative thing. So your brain just basically shuts down. You don't want to think about it. So your brain activity reduces significantly. Now, looking at these images, can you tell me which of these images represent someone who's going through depression? This is the PET scan of the brain. A PET scan is basically a scan which shows any metabolic process in your brain. Any activity is basically caught by this process. It's like an MRI and a CT scan also, but a PET is usually more comprehensive in nature. So this is basically a scan. Can anyone tell me which one, right or left? Second image, okay. Anyone else?
You can drop your, okay, somebody saying first image. Left. Okay, so I skip to see the majority.
The majority is clearly saying image 1, which is the image on the left side of the screen. Yes, you are correct. Although this is supposed to be a trick question because more people tend to go for the second image because it shows more brain activity. So yes, you are correct. The one on the left is showing a person going through depression because of decreased brain activity. PET scan doesn't really pick up anything because, well, there is nothing going on. There's very, very little metabolic activity going on here. So this is a very, this is an aggregate almost, because the deaths that are happening during this period are changing heavily day to day. This is the time when I made the slide, and I think that time there were approximately 42.3 lakh deaths all over the world. So just imagine how many people are going through this process, their family, their friends, their loved ones, even doctors and nurses, people in healthcare go through grieving because, you know, even though they don't want to, they actually end up getting attached to patients. And this has happened several times. We actually learn this when we learn psychology, is how to avoid getting attached because of this reason. Just imagine the number of people that are actually going through, depression, or depression again is a stage of grieving. So grieving in general. So the concept of being alone that a person goes through during this process is not true. Is first, the first step to healing is understanding that you are not alone. A lot of people are going through this with you. All of us are in some form or the other. Now, this is, like I said, first step to understanding that, okay, we can get through this, is understanding that you're not alone. Now, how do you go from here? The next slide. Developing a healthy coping mechanism. This is your basic end game. This is your plan that you want to follow through. This is what's actually going to lead you to that final destination that you want to reach. Although there is technically no final destination in psychology, I'm just saying this to make you understand. So what is a healthy coping mechanism? Because you've heard this term coping mechanism several times. It's become very common when we talk about mental health in general. A healthy coping mechanism is a way to deal with loss that is, well, healthy in nature for obvious reasons. But how do you develop one which is healthy? Like the speaker before me just said, she actually explained a lot of this very, very thoroughly. She did a wonderful job with that. So anything from meditation to listening to music to talking to people, whatever gets you through, whatever makes you feel comfortable is a healthy coping mechanism. Now, that being said, a lot of people enjoy doing drugs and drinking alcohol. Now, that is not a healthy coping mechanism. That is you just trying to numb yourself again, because all of these are basically substances that will stop, again, numb your brain activity. So developing a healthy coping mechanism is basically making sure that you're dealing with the emotions that your brain is actually trying to, somehow process. it's a struggle really for your body and your brain to really go through all this. So developing a healthy coping mechanism is very important. Now, usually the best, alternative to something like this is talking to the people you really love and talking to the people who have gone through this with you, especially in case of a death. It's not just you who's going through this, it's your entire family. The best way to deal with it would be probably sitting with them and just, realizing that you're not alone. Talk to them about how you feel. If you feel angry, tell them you feel angry. If you feel sad, tell them you feel sad. Tell them whatever you feel, even if you feel that feeling is not justified or doesn't make sense. It really doesn't matter. What matters is getting it out. Take professional help if you need it. But do what you think is right. That is important. More than that, please, 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 and we say this again and again, stay away from drugs, stay away from alcohol, stay away from anything of this sort, because this is usually the time when a person is very, psychologically, emotionally weak. And this is the, time, like I said, you commit acts that you really don't want to commit. So you really need to think about what you're doing and who you are as a person before trying and going to do these things. So yeah, that's it from me.